I'm John Rodgers from Cuyahoga Falls, and today I'm representing the Portage Trail group of the Sierra Club. And we're going to talk about 100 years of the Sierra Club, and that only takes us up to 1992. But I went over this, and it's such a good history, not only of the Sierra Club, but of the conservation movement, which you probably know as the environmental movement. So we'll do it as Defending Mother Earth, 100 years of the Sierra Club. Over 100 years ago, while people were walking and climbing in the Sierra Nevada, that's in California, much thought was being given to some sort of group to protect the high country of California. But the act of creating the Sierra Club was done in a law office in San Francisco, many miles from the spray of Yosemite Falls in the Sierra Nevada. And I'm going to stop right there for a moment just to tell you about these gorgeous falls. From the top where you see the water first start till down a little bit below where you can see in the picture is almost half a mile. And these are the magnificent Yosemite Falls in your Yosemite National Park. And John Muir was only one of the people involved, but he stood to gain the most, because with such an organization, his work would go on. And this is where it was done. The law office was that of Warren Olney, who drew up the Articles of Incorporation. And with 27 people present, the deed was done on May 28, 1892, with the necessary papers being signed on June 4, 1892. And probably at least John Muir had his mine out in Yosemite on this old Jeffrey pine. 4 people were the principals in starting the club, and you'll hear a brief statement about each of them. John Muir probably knew more about the Sierra Nevada than any other person. He had already roamed through its valleys and had climbed many of its peaks. And he was always studying the rock, the vegetation, the animals, the glacial marks, and even the weather. John of the Mountains traveled light and traveled far, and he knew his range of light. John Muir was the first president and continued in this capacity for about 22 years. Professor J.H. Sanger of the University of California, and I don't have a picture of him, started the first movement towards an organization in 1886. He wanted to start a library in Yosemite Valley dealing with mountaineering literature, maps, etc. By 1890, the forming of a club or association was being widely discussed. By this time, the name Sierra Club was being used. And this is Tennion Lake in the high country of Yosemite. Warren Olney of San Francisco had legal and business experience with political connections. He later became mayor of Oakland in the Bay Area. He had many contacts at the universities, and he had the practical nature to get it down on paper and have people agree to the rules by signing their names. And Robert Johnson I do have a picture of. Robert Underwood Johnson was editor of Century magazine. After a high country trip with John Muir, in which they saw the massive destruction by sheep, he opened the magazine to Muir. And John Muir used the opportunity to describe in detail the whole area: terrain, flowers, plants, trees, animals. Johnson envisioned a great national park of the whole area, not just the valley. But other people were involved, and I want you to see their names as I read them. At least that gives them a degree of recognition and remembrance. William D. Arns, William Keith, David Starr Jordan, Cornelius Beach Bradley, John C. Branna, William Beatty, and Willis Polk. Even though the Sierra Club was formed to protect the Sierra Nevada in California, before 1900 the group had supported the U.S. Forestry Commission in the effort to create national forest parks of the Grand Canyon, which you're looking at, and Mount Rainier. The Grand Canyon being in Arizona, Mount Rainier being in Washington State. Then the club wrote the papers which were the basis of the legislation to create Mount Rainier National Park. In California, they had led the fight to keep the size of Yosemite, not yet a national park, intact, and had recommended the preservation of coastal redwoods. Now, those coastal redwoods were going to wait a long time for a national park to come about. Joseph LeConte was a charter member, a director, and honorary president of the Sierra Club. He was a leader in the mapping of the Sierra Nevada and contributed photography and articles to the Sierra Club Bulletin for years. Between 1900 and 1910, two things that still affect the American people on a national basis occurred. One, in 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt, he's the one on the left, camped with John Muir on the right in Yosemite, and in well, let me show you where they camped first. This is the Mariposa Grove of big trees. They camped the first night there, and the second night they camped where they had this view from Glacier Point. So upon Theodore Roosevelt's return to Washington, he pushed through Congress the creation of 5 national parks. Now remember, there was not yet a National Park Service. He set aside 148 million acres as part of the National Forest. And number 2, the Antiquities Act, the National Monument Act, was passed. And Theodore Roosevelt used it to create 16 national monuments. This was one of the very first. This is Chaco Canyon, and that is Pueblo Bonito. And then Olympic National Park in Washington State. Theodore Roosevelt was a man who carried through to achieve all of this, but John Muir was indeed the catalyst that TR needed. And of importance to all of us who love the national parks, during this period, the Sierra Club advocated the creation of Glacier National Park in Montana. And that park is probably my all-time favorite. In California during this time, the club had helped preserve the Calaveras big trees, had pushed hard and finally brought Yosemite back under federal control, and had vigorously opposed the damming of Hetch Hetchy Valley in Yosemite. During the early 1900s, a professor from the University of California, Will Colby, got the outings program going and continued as leader until 1929. He was a close friend of John Muir. He served as secretary for many years. But in the next decade, 1911 to 1920, the Hetch Hetchy battle was lost as Congress allowed the building of the dam and the flooding of a valley that John Muir considered almost the equal of Yosemite Valley. These are 2 old pictures of what that Hetch Hetchy Valley was like before. And then the dam taken by one of our Sierra Clubbers, and then after the dam was built and the water started filling up. You must understand the significance of this action in order to understand the driving force behind the Sierra Club. This is a valley within a national park, and the city of San Francisco was allowed to destroy this scenic wonder that had been set aside for all time for the American people. The action was right in line with the treatment of treaties with American Indians. If you detect skepticism towards words coming from many governmental sources, you have detected the eternal vigilance mood of the Sierra Club. And in parentheses, this fight brings out the first of 3 contradictions that I'll cover. Warren Olney, one of the founders of the Sierra Club, and the one who drew up the founding papers, was in favor of the Hetch Hetchy Dam, and he resigned from the club. This is a little part of Hetch Hetchy Valley out there, still today. In the same time period, the Sierra Club successfully opposed plans for dams in Yellowstone National Park. You're going to hear quite a bit about dams in this presentation. You already have. And the club urged the establishment of a National Park Service and supported a bill doing just that. It was a Sierra Club member, Stephen Mather, who became its first director. Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into trees. The winds will blow their own freshness into you, and the storms their energy, while cares will drip off like autumn leaves. That's the way we like to remember John Muir, with his own words, and those are his most quoted ones. In 1914, John Muir died, but his Sierra Club and ours was firmly established, and many of us speak as though he were still roaming the Sierra Nevada. Perhaps he is. Marion Randolph Parson was the first woman elected to the board of directors of the Sierra Club. She had worked with John Muir as an editor and secretary, especially on his Alaska book. She was a mountaineer, a painter, writer, and she excelled in several other areas. During her long years with the Sierra Club, she pursued her activities with deep insight and enthusiasm. In the 1920s action of the Sierra Club was confined mainly within California, but two items stand out on a national basis. Number one, the club helped stop the movement for dams on the Kings River in the Sierra Nevada, and that's the King that you're looking at. The club helped in many ways to increase the size of Sequoia National Park, and Mount Whitney was included in it. And this is Mount Whitney, these points right in here. And this is taken from the eastern side, out on the dry side of it. And in the 1927-28 term, the Sierra Club had its first woman president, Aurelia S. Harwood. She gave much time and much money to purchase land for national parks. She was very active and very generous. Now, I never know how to pronounce this man's last name, but I'll call him Francis Farquhar. I'm not sure. He was the historian of the Sierra Nevada. He represented the Sierra Club in Washington, D.C. in pushing to expand Sequoia National Park. Francis joined the club in 1911 and was very active for over 60 years in many roles, including president. The 1930s brought more work in California to push for making Kings Canyon a national park. And that's what you're looking at now, part of Kings Canyon. A new name came to the forefront of the club as Ansel Adams went to Washington, D.C. and lobbied the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration to preserve Kings Canyon and the High Sierras. The necessary action was finally taken by Congress in 1940. In addition to his success as a photographer, Ansel Adams continued over the years as an effective lobbyist, often with his photographs. And here's his beauty of Yosemite Valley with the clouds over it. But that was only the activity dealing with California. The Sierra Club urged the National Park Service to investigate Admiralty Island in southeast Alaska with thoughts of making it a national park. Legislation to create Olympic National Park in Washington, which is where you're seeing these beautiful avalanche lilies, that legislation was supported, as was the push to extend the boundaries of Death Valley National Monument, which you are now looking at. The club opposed the water diversion tunnel under Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. And once more, a proposal for another dam was opposed, this one in Yellowstone National Park. You have to understand that the Sierra Club, even back in those days, considers the national parks and monuments to be holy ground. The 1940s brought to the surface the short-range and very greedy hordes that would use World War II as an excuse to get into protected areas with shovel and drill and saw. One particular fight was to repeal the Antiquities Act that had served Theodore Roosevelt so well. The club vigorously opposed that move, and the act still stands today. Jackson Hole, the area just in front and to the east of the Teton Mountains in western Wyoming, was incorporated into Grand Teton National Park. The Sierra Club had won a long fight for its protection. The Sierra Club fought successfully against several more dams. One would have flooded 20,000 acres of Glacier National Park in Montana, and the other would have desecrated Kings Canyon National Park. And the club supported the legislation creating Joshua Tree National Monument in California. The time of the 1950s is considered to be the time when the Sierra Club went national. But think back over the last few minutes and you'll remember many accomplishments of national significance dating back into the 1800s. But it was in the 1950s that Dinosaur National Monument on the Colorado-Utah border became the next target of the dam builders. Echo Park. Now, Echo Park is over in here in Colorado, and Split Mountain, which you'll hear in a minute, is over here in Utah, right by the Visitor Center, or the Dinosaur Quarry, as it's called. So we'll talk about first Echo Park. Echo Park, the canyon country of the monument, this one, was to be the site of one dam, and Split Mountain was the other site. A little more canyon country for you. The battle was joined, the Sierra Club versus the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and many other parts of our own government, and they were going to dam that river twice within this one national monument. Scientists in any branch of the government, but especially Interior, were forbidden to speak out about the known effects of the dams. So the Sierra Club and a few individuals came alone to the battle, and they won. We have here another one of those contradictions. Theodore Roosevelt, who did so much to conserve and preserve, was the principal one in giving so much power to the Bureau of Reclamation and their principal activity of dam building. That bureau then moved to a lesser known but beautiful area downstream beyond where the Green River joins the Colorado River. So we're now talking about the Colorado. Glen Canyon, sometimes referred to as the place no one knew until too late. For in the decade of the 1950s, the dams in Dinosaur were defeated, but construction was underway on Glen Canyon Dam. Now I'm going to do a different thing. I'm going to back up to that last picture. I wanted you to see Reservoir Powell, but I want to tell you a little bit more about Cathedral in the Desert. The dam should never have been built, but it backs up the Colorado River into that Powell Reservoir and covers forever this place, Cathedral in the Desert. I have never seen it. There are not many people that have seen it, and it's gone forever. And under this picture in a Sierra Club publication are these words: "Remember these things lost, and under the vaulting roof of the cathedral, light a candle to the memory." And now a quote from me. I'll get you up to the next one. "The damming of a river is so final that by rights all people should have a say in such a decision. They should be heard before the first stake is driven, and their testimony should actually affect the decision. Hearings after the decision is made are in most cases useless. The rights of citizens has not been guaranteed by allowing comment while the waters climb the canyon walls." For the United States, the 1960s were strange years. President John Kennedy was killed, and President L.B. Johnson moved us further and further into the Vietnam War. But the dam builders were still in the temple. The Bureau of Reclamation wanted to build 2 more dams on the Colorado River. One in Marble Canyon, upstream, that's right in here, and one downstream at Bridge Canyon. This is the main part of the Grand Canyon that you and I see when we're there. The Colorado River was already dammed enough to give 600 miles of reservoir. Now, to bring home the Sierra Club's point on destruction of rivers, mountains, valleys, and scenic splendor of all kind, listen to an exchange between David Brower, this man, first executive director of the Sierra Club, and Congressman Morris Udall, sometimes called Mo Udall, of Arizona, in a 1967 hearing. And here's Mo Udall, and Mr. Udall is speaking. This is in the congressional record, as I understand. One of the things that has troubled many of my colleagues here is what they deem the impossibly adamant, non-compromising position of the Sierra Club. We have 104 miles of living river, the longest stretch of national park in the country. We enlarged that to 158 miles. We're willing to enlarge the Grand Canyon to take in Marble Gorge and Vermilion Cliffs and all of that. We're willing to talk about going downstream another 13 miles. What would the Sierra Club accept? If we have a low Bridge Canyon Dam, maybe 100 feet high, is that too much? Is there any point at which you compromise here? And this man speaks, Mr. Brower. Mr. Udall, you are not giving us anything that God didn't put there in the first place. Now, I think that is the thing we are not entitled to compromise. That is the primary scenic resource of this country. If there are no other ways to go about getting water, I would still say that the compromise should not be made, that Arizona should be subsidized with something other than the world's Grand Canyon or any part of it. We have no choice. There have to be groups who will hold for these things that are not replaceable. If we stop doing that, we might as well stop being an organization, and conservation organizations might as well throw in the towel. And then Mr. Udall replies, I know the strength and the sincerity of your feelings, and I respect them. Now, this is the third contradiction, but this one worked to the good, in my opinion. For this is the same Morris Udall who headed the committee in which John Seibling worked so diligently and with exceptional chairman support to preserve the great tracts of Alaska lands. And this is Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. This fight against the Grand Canyon dams was the one in which the Sierra Club used full-page ads stating, if they can turn the Grand Canyon into a cash register, is any national park safe? And should we also flood the Sistine Chapel so tourists can get near the ceiling? I have to chuckle on that one, I always do. And for this battle for the integrity of the national park system, the Sierra Club lost its tax deductibility. And because of the effectiveness of our lobbying effort, it has never been reinstated. The opposition had been formidable. The fight was hard, but the victory was exhilarating. And to pick up on David Brower's use of the term conservation organizations, the closing years of the decade saw coalitions being formed to fight issues such as the jet port in the Florida Everglades, which was defeated. Later, such coalitions would become more common and helpful and effective. The club also pushed for a North Cascades National Park in Washington State and for a Redwoods National Park in California. Both were passed by the end of the decade, and Congress had also enacted a wild and scenic river system. The 1970s brought into being the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund. The Environmental Defense Fund, a completely separate group, had already fought a DDT battle and won. And now the Sierra Club's legal arm won another DDT fight, forcing a domestic ban on the substance. Now we need a ban on its manufacture. While environmental and land lawsuits had been used before, they came into their own in this period and are still used extensively and effectively, and they are as often used against government agencies as against private industries. Government at all levels, and especially the military, continue to violate environmental laws. This is bombing practice down in Oklahoma. A noteworthy accomplishment for which the Sierra Club can only take partial credit was the passage of a water pollution control bill over President Nixon's veto. This decade also brought the Sierra Club into the political arena directly, although it was in 1980 that the first entry into the electoral process was made. One of the most important coalitions in which the Sierra Club has been involved was formed, and that was the one to preserve Alaska National Interest lands. That act was passed in 1980. Now, I realize that you are not going to be able to see this, but I thought I really wanted to put the complete list of everybody in that coalition. So that act was passed in 1980 and signed by President Carter. It set aside 103 million acres of parks, wildlife refuges, and wilderness areas in Alaska. The whole affair was a joint effort with many people involved at many levels, including this man, Henry Jackson, on the Senate side, and Mo Udall on the House side. But if you want to single out one person for praise, it would be our former congressman, that is from Summit County, and Sierra Club member, John Seiberling. He has received the John Muir Award, the highest award of the Sierra Club, for his efforts on behalf of the good earth. A short list of happenings will give an idea of the range of interests and the tremendous requirements for expertise within the Sierra Club and other conservation organizations. Number one, Highway Trust Fund open to mass transit, and here's an Amtrak. Number two, clear cutting in national forests in West Virginia ruled illegal. Now, I have to admit that I do not have a picture of the clear cutting in West Virginia. This clear cutting is actually in Washington State. But clear cutting anywhere, especially on hillsides, leaves a lot to be desired. Number three, defense and strengthening of the Clean Air Act. Number four, Superfund legislation was passed to help clean up toxic waste dumps. Number five, 4 million acres in the lower 48 states was declared wilderness. That probably should be were declared wilderness. Number six, after years of campaigning, the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act was passed. And number seven, lobbied successfully to establish Big Thicket Preserve in Texas and Big Cypress Preserve in Florida. 1981 and its decade brought the greatest threats to the conservation and environmental movement in this century. You didn't just have the special interest legislator like Ted Stevens, the man you're looking at, the Alaska senator who tried so hard to kill the Alaska Lands Bill. You also had many gains that might have been pushed aside by such people as President Reagan and his Secretary of Interior, James Watt. This is a Pat Oliphant 1980 cartoon, and those are bears talking. And since you probably can't read the caption, I'll read it for you. And this is Pat Oliphant's words also. Surely, says I, not the James Watt, folk hero and famous wilderness rapist. That's me, says he. And I says, not the renowned despoiler of our precious national heritage. Right, says he. So I ate him. And then the little guys that Pat Oliphant uses at the bottom of his, one of them says, and that's how Goldilocks got his. But the conservation organization had their greatest increase in membership in those years. The Sierra Club went from 181,773 in 1980 to 325,000 in 1982, a 79% gain in only 2 years. And with membership at 633,000 at the end of November 1990, that's when I was doing this, that's a 248% increase for the decade. At the end of January 1991, Ohio had a little over 18,000 members, with 2,000 of those in the Portage Trail group. We've fallen back a little bit from those numbers, but they're on the increase right now because of people like Ted Stevens being in his position and the mood of Congress at this time. But just as important as the numbers is the fact that many of these people are vocal. They were and will be heard. They write letters, send telegrams, make phone calls, and in general tell their legislators what they think. While much of the effort in this decade was devoted to holding on to gains, there were actually some gains. Congress passed a wilderness bill protecting 6.8 million acres in national forests and 1.4 million in national parks. This is not new federal land, but land into which you do not build roads or bother nature in her schemes within these tracts. And one new national park came into being, Great Basin in Nevada. They didn't provide the funding for it, really, but it's there. Congress also passed measures to protect wetlands, and now we are faced with governmental threats to this protection. The Clean Water Act was reauthorized over President Reagan's veto. But the Environmental Protection Agency extended air pollution deadlines for some urban areas, extensions up to 25 years. These extensions were granted in 1987. And in 1988, just the very next year, EPA said that 135 million Americans live in communities that fail to meet air quality standards. So much for the reasoning of those that are supposed to protect us. But the point does illustrate one of the reasons for the continued concern of the environmental movement. As we move into our next 100 years, we have many more battles and many other groups that are also in the ongoing battle. Environmental battles are never won once and for all. Another Congress, or even a single person in a key role like Ted Stevens, can undo a decision that preserved a scenic wonder or that cleaned up the air or water. And thus the use of the term ongoing battle. Now this one never photographed very good. That's national parks and conservation. It always shines back at my camera. And so I thought it would be appropriate to throw another picture of the Capitol in D.C. in after that statement. Now we do have quite an array of methods to help fight those battles. Education. We'll continue working with teachers by speaking to schools and providing information about teaching aids. Some of the position papers, you might call them. We'll take part in Earth Day and Earth Year events. Those people are supposed to be cleaning up. I think they had already done that. We'll continue to have outings and even cleanup outings, and this was definitely one because I know I was on it. Legal action. We prefer that everyone take Earth's part, but when parties will not even obey environmental law, we have our Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund. This group also brings legal action for other parties, such as the National Audubon Society. Political action. This function can be a double-edged sword, but when successful, it can help in putting environmentally sound laws on the books. The man you're seeing there was dedicating our signal tree in Summit County, and his name is Tom Sawyer, and he is now our representative from part of Summit County. The type of candidate who is endorsed by the Sierra Club can also be a key to maintaining the integrity of the national park system. Lobbying. Much of our membership money goes to the task of legislative lobbying on the national scene. And here in Ohio, we have a full-time person whose primary function is to be an environmental lobbyist in Columbus. And the complete support of this function is paid by the Sierra Club members of Ohio. Grassroots. We'll continue the practice of urging our members to take part in the club's activities and its direction. We want members to write their legislators at all levels and to let their thoughts be known to their newspapers. This is Lou Brazenly. He's currently our group chairperson, and we usually put together the newsletter at his house. We hope they will participate in cleanups, in tree plantings, and in hearings on environmental issues. And we hope that we can enlist the aid of many more people in the job of protecting our holy ground. Now, between this point and the end of this presentation, you'll see 10 National Park Service areas in which the Sierra Club played a prominent role in the preservation. I'll try and give you the names of them as we go through. Olympic National Park in Washington State. Glacier National Park, Montana. Dinosaur National Monument, and you've heard a bit about that, but I never showed you any of the dinosaur bones until now. We'll continue to deal with our original purposes. Number one, to explore, enjoy, and preserve. Number two, to undertake and to publish, and I'm not giving you the ends of these. Number three, to educate the people. Number four, to enlist public interest and cooperation in protecting. But I've left off the last part of each because the scope of each continues to change. 100 years ago, we had no air pollution hanging over the Grand Canyon. This is the Grand Tetons National Park in Wyoming, and this is Diablo Lake in the Northern Cascades in Washington State. You were perfectly safe when you drank directly from many lakes and streams, and I've done it. Did anyone in the late 1800s dream that so much of the world's forests might be in danger of disappearing? Was there any concern about the extinction of species? The buffalo, perhaps, but not thousands of species of plants and animals. Can you picture someone back then being concerned about the carrying capacity of our planet? Yes, that's a spotted owl. We know that if we would continue to serve as nature's advocate, these issues, new since our founding, must be addressed on a continuing basis. We will continue to fight for clean air and water, to fight for the cleanup of toxic waste, and we will face other issues not yet known that threaten the very life of our Mother Earth. And this is Old Faithful in Yellowstone. The National Park Service and our national lands will still be high on our priority list. Scenic wonder and its protection brought us into being, and we will not forsake that high calling. In following David Brower's example, we intend nothing in the way of compromise as regards the national park lands. We're speaking of holy ground. Petrified Forests, Arizona. Yosemite, California. Much of what has been saved in the realm of scenic beauty in this country had a start in John Muir. That start, combined with the friendship of Theodore Roosevelt and TR's power and drive, completed those deeds of preservation. And then John Muir's Sierra Club carried on the tradition. Grand Canyon National Park. Glacier Bay National Park, that's in Alaska, and Grand Canyon is in Arizona, and back to Glacier National Park in Montana. The next century will still see the Sierra Club in the forefront of the environmental movement. We'll continue to take the Earth's part in controversy. We'll continue to take seriously our role as stewards of the Earth. We'll strive to see that as we pass the torch to the new wave of members, we have made a difference, that we have helped stay the hand of the despoiler, and that future generations do have a heritage of clean air, clean water, and an endless supply of scenic beauty. This fragile little planet is our home, and we fully intend to pass it on to future generations in a condition that will indicate that we have been good stewards of Mother Earth's holy ground.